This is Women's Tech Radio,
a show on the Jupiter Broadcasting Network interviewing interesting women in technology, exploring their roles and how they're successful in technology careers. I'm Paige.
And I'm Angela.
So Angela, today we talked to Carolyn, and she is a recent mobile developer at Lookout. She comes from a data scientist background, and we have some really interesting chat about her transition and just all the things that she's gotten into, what's been hard, what's been awesome, and it's a really good time.
Yeah. And before we get into the interview, I just want to mention that you can support Women's Tech Radio by going to patreon.com/today. It is a subscription-based support of our network. It supports all the shows, but specifically this show, Women's Tech Radio. So go to patreon.com/today.
And we got started by asking Carolyn what she's up to in technology these days.
Yeah, so I have sort of an interesting story of, or at least I think it's interesting, of how I got into tech. So I was a business major, not sure what I wanted to do with my life, ended up in like operations at a big company, but I always really, really loved data and I just loved spreadsheets. And I met someone that it sort of taught me SQL and taught me how to be faster with what I was doing with SQL. And I found out I really loved SQL. So I sort of just started building from there. I ended up at Lookout, which is a mobile security anti-malware company, and just sort of like opened my eyes to a lot of technology. And I started as a data analyst, started managing the data warehouse. And then earlier this year, just moved over to Android development. So I'm learning a lot. And so I'm new to engineering, but I have been speaking engineer, that's what I say, for a very long time. So right now I'm working on a side project, which we'll be releasing at the end of this year, and currently learning RX Java, which is pretty new. It's really cool, but there's definitely not really a lot out there about it. So I spend my days currently just really doing a lot of learning.
All right, so I will admit I am not familiar with RX Java. How is it different than normal Java?
Yeah, so it deals with like streaming data. And so it's really good for when you're trying to chain things together without, the data might not be available yet.
Oh, okay. So it's Java non-blocking?
Yeah.
Cool. Or you could probably continue explaining that for the audience.
And me.
Oh, yeah.
Well, I'm still like wrapping. I was just like, so I earlier this year did like an online Android bootcamp while I was still doing my data job and managing the data team and just sort of doing like 20 things at once. And now I've, once I started to feel like I really got a foothold in Java, we decided to use RX Java. So it's like, and now I'm like relearning a lot of things. So I'm still feeling like I'm in a foreign country where I don't speak the language. So I'm definitely, it's made me actually have this like huge respect for Netflix, because they're the ones that wrote the Android library for it. And like, they're just doing so much cool stuff over there. And they have a lot of good tutorials about it. So I definitely recommend. There's a podcast about it, and that the head guy at Netflix is talking about RX Java. It's really interesting. So I can add that to the show links for you guys too.
Netflix is really interesting because they essentially, they're stack, they're really stack agnostic, where they look at their teams and they say, do what you need to do to get your job done and find the best way to do it. So I know that they have Angular, Ember, they have a embedded team, they have the Java RX Java team, and they all just kind of, talk together because they've really pieced these pieces out. It's really fascinating how they're kind of making that work with being probably one of the biggest data companies in the world right now.
Yeah. Well, they're definitely like finding, if there's not a tool out there that meets their needs, they'll build it, and I have a friend who's a doctor, and I was explaining this concept to her, and she was like, this is so weird. She's like, why would they build it and like open source it, and for me personally, one of the things I actually stumbled upon in the tech community, which I didn't really realize, is just the amount of support that people are willing and companies are willing to give each other. I mean, there's obviously companies that are competing and hate each other, but at the same time, like, I'm sure if you got their engineers together, they would like talk shop and like share things they're doing. And it's really cool. When I, decided to be an engineer late last year, I had so many people that were giving me free materials and helping me. And the tech community, like every night of the week, you can go to a meetup and like have dinner and meet people and have people help you, which was sort of a happy accident to find out about the tech community in general.
Yeah, I totally love that. I think and I love that it comes out of kind of some of our roots of open source and being able to reach out and touch each other's projects and just help out. Like, I was listening to a podcast recently, ironically, and they were talking about how, they'd open source their website kind of, and it's a paid service. And the guy was like, I'm shocked because like every week we get somebody who just pops in and is like, hey, I forked your website and made this change because I found this problem and here it is back. And this guy that fixed things is a paid customer of theirs, but he's still like jumping in to fix things for the company. It's just like, really awesome.
Yeah. So the boot camp that I did is CodePath, which is a link in the show notes. And what they do is they go out to companies and do consulting. And then they also have a boot camp if you are an engineer that you can, if you're already, I think like 2 or 3 years in, you can go. So I wasn't like a candidate to be part of their boot camp and even part of the consulting. My company said they'd pay for it, but they said, you really need to learn Java before you do this boot camp. So they gave me all the materials for free and they just said I could learn it on my own, which was pretty awesome, and had calls with me and sort of got me started on my path, just totally pro bono, which was really awesome.
That is really awesome.
Yeah.
Very cool. Okay, so as a developer, I have to ask, how is it that it was SQL that grabbed your attention? Because most developers I know just absolutely hate working in SQL. Like we will avoid it like the plague. I actually kind of got my start in SQL as well, so I do like it. But most people I talk to, they're like, I love all this web stuff. Please don't make me write SQL.
Yeah. So what's funny is the engineers on my team, when I see the SQL queries they're writing, I'm so happy because that's like a place I can teach them and be like, whoa, this is not good. So what happened was I was working for Williams Sonoma, which is like, they also own Pottery Barn, and they run it as this big monolithic company where they don't really care if people are efficient, and they would be perfectly happy with people just entering data all day. Instead of making efficient processes or systems. And it was my first job out of college, so I didn't really know that like life didn't really have to be like that. And so I was spending like a lot of time like manually going in and doing things. And I just so happened to meet someone at my company named Mark Graskop, who like really opened the door for me, where he's like, just learn SQL, and like you can do this job that took you all day. You can do it in like 20 minutes. And so it was more just a fact of like me being like, whoa, like this is pretty powerful. These people are really living in the dark ages. And so we literally wrote a script that would do our jobs for you. We called it Magic Hands. And then we'd like go to coffee, and like no one that I worked for really, they just wanted us to get the work done. They didn't know that we could like eliminate everyone's jobs. And we called it Magic Hands. It was so funny. And we'd like unleash Magic Hands on like 3 computers, and then realize like, oh, the system couldn't take that much, input. So we'd like bring it down to 2, and then like it would enter in like a price of like $1 million for a couch instead of $1,000 or something. And so we'd get a call from like, tech team in India overnight when like something process blew up. So like, we definitely had to like fine tune Magic Hands. And so then I moved over to the technical team after that, because they sort of saw like, okay, she can actually be on this team and do this without having a background. And then once I moved into data, it's like SQL's king, no matter what, anyone says about big data and all these big data tools. Like the backbone of everything is really SQL. So learning how to do efficient queries will make your job so much happier. And if you write SQL wrong, you're going to give people wrong answers. So on the data side, SQL to me made so much sense. But I guess it was sort of the first like real programming I ever got my hands on. So I love it. But
so I actually have had a couple friends recently who have asked me, because I kind of learned SQL the hard way by just throwing my head against Access, which is probably the worst interface ever.
Yeah.
But Do you have any good recommendations for books or online resources for SQL? Because it's kind of like this weird black hole where I can learn almost everything else online, and I can't seem to find anything good for SQL.
Yeah. So the thing about SQL is that you will not be good at it. It will not make, like, you'll not really get your hands around it until you actually use it. So it's one of those things where, like, you need access to a data set and you need questions to answer, and then you'll get it. So there are resources out there. I actually, when I was hiring data analysts as a manager, I just created my own data set and like posted it for people to, and then had them like answer some questions to show me they knew SQL or not. But yeah, it's really like a learning by doing kind of thing, which I guess most things are. But like, if you don't have an interesting data set to work with and you're not trying to solve interesting problems, you're just never going to pick it up. But I haven't really found that there are available data sets out there. And as bad as Access is, and as it like gives you the graphical interface, like don't use that. You need to actually physically write it out. If you use Access, if you get access to a data set, dump it in Access and then use the just handwriting the SQL, you'll get it.
Yeah, totally.
So in the form that you filled out before the show, you said that you're still trying to figure out why you never thought to be an engineer before.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of people that don't know that the way their personality and skills would make them perfect for a position. What would you recommend people do to figure out what best to be or do or try?
Yeah, so I've been thinking about this a lot, actually. So when I was younger, I grew up in San Diego, and it was very much like a beach culture, like very dude bro-y. It wasn't cool to be smart. When I was a kid, that's how I felt. Mm-hmm. And but I was like networking the internet, like in my parents' house, like running the wireless, like created their wireless network. And I was like one of the first people on Napster, like stealing music and like creating CDs. And like, yep. I had this little computer in my room, and my friends would come over and like, they'd be like in their bikinis, like, beep, beep, like, let's go to the beach. Like, how many, did you make a CDs? I'm like, wait, I'm just like, like stealing music off the internet, like but it didn't, to me, it was like, I mean, this is like 1998. So like, I was really probably one of like 10,000 people doing this. And like,
we might've shared that stolen music together.
Yeah, I was just going to say like, 1998, that was my golden year too for Napster and Winamp.
Yeah. Yeah.
It really
totally
kicks the llama's ass.
Yep.
Yeah. But for some reason, it was like, it never crossed my mind that like, I was really good at this. I was way more interested in it than any of my friends. And I was just like, but instead I just was like, I'm just going to go to the beach and like, we're going to like try and get beer and do all these things. And I was like, and I'm trying to figure out like why it never crossed my mind to do that. But I also think it was a different time in that like technology people weren't talking about technology. People weren't like interested in talking about apps, and like 1 in 20 people had a cell phone back then. So I think maybe it was just kind of like that time. And when I went to college, I was a business major, and I thought like I would just do business. Like I wasn't really sure like what I wanted to do. And I think I had all the tools, and I knew that I loved computers and I loved building things, but I never really had someone sit me down and like, I never really just had that like career thought. I just sort of like followed the path that just like I thought was laid out. And it really wasn't until like mid last year that I thought I could really be an engineer and do it. And it was really what sort of tipped me was like all these boot camps coming out and people just like going and being like doing it. And I was like, I had this like this thought of like, what would I do if I could do anything and I wasn't scared to do it? And like, to me, engineering was it. And the Lookout was like incredibly supportive and like let me move teams, which was like really great and sort of a rare find in a company that would support someone to do this. So I got really lucky. But, I think now with Women Who Code and a lot of organizations asking these questions of like why women aren't engineers. And I think it's, I'm like, it's because no one ever asked me and I never asked myself. And now that it's sort of becoming like the norm, I'm hoping that more women will sort of like naturally follow the path to be an engineer. Because I think if there would have been more of that growing up, that I probably would have, found that path earlier.
Yeah, that's actually part of why we started the podcast is because, you say, oh, it was a different time then. And it was actually my conversation with a 16-year-old that spawned me to start this because I had this conversation and the 16-year-old good at math, enjoyed science, like tech stuff, didn't do the assembling computers thing because nobody really does that anymore.
Yeah.
But I was like, well, have you considered being a programmer? And she was like, no, that's for boys, right? And I was like, whoa.
Yeah.
Whoa, this was last year. So,
yeah.
So, but I do think it's changing. I think organizations like Women Who Code, Girl Develop It, Chick Tech, all these different things are kind of getting in there and saying, hey guys, or hey ladies,
right.
you can do this too. And there's no reason like I like to say, girls type just as well as boys.
So I haven't been to a boot camp, but it seems like that might be, aside from trying to join Women Who Code or another place like that would support you, but the boot camp might help you. Like, is it like a conference where you can go and just listen or watch different parts of development?
Yeah. So I did a lot of research on boot camps at the end of last year, and there's some good and there's a lot of good, but there's also a lot of bad. So a lot of, you can't expect to just go somewhere for 3 months and then come out and be like a fully fledged engineer and be ready to work, So this boot camp is just a once a week for 2 hours for 8 weeks kind of thing. Or I think it's twice a week for 2 hours for 8 weeks. But they sort of are teaching mobile development to people who are already engineers. So, but they just gave me they record their lectures and they have all their assignments online. And so they just gave me access to their materials. So I could write, I could work on apps on my own. So I'd say it definitely took me a lot longer to get through it. And I ended up just doing the parts of the boot camp that really applied to what I'd be working on at Lookout. So I could just get up to speed faster. But, their boot camp that would be a week of work would take me 3 weeks or something to get done.
Mm.
So definitely was it took me a while to get through it. But it really is, I couldn't say enough good things about CodePath. They do some really cool stuff. And they're really smart guys. So actually all men, but they do have a lot of women that go to their boot camp. So
yeah, there's definitely a really wide range of what we're calling a boot camp right now, because so we have CodePath, which is this kind of part-time thing, and then there'll be other online part-time things, and then there's even in-person part-time things where you can go in the evenings and it's a full 5 days a week. Like the boot camp that I worked out of is a full 5 days a week. It's a 16-week program if you do it at night, or a 12-week program if you do it in the day, and it is full stack development. You go from the front end all the way through the back end, and I think that's probably the most common, is that it's essentially 2 to 3 months. Some of them go out as far as 6 months of get in there, get your hands in code, have a portfolio at the end kind of a thing. But I agree with you, Carolyn, that you can't go in to a bootcamp expecting to come out the other end like a full-fledged developer unless you work your butt off. And there are companies hiring beginners. I think that the market is getting a little bit saturated because there are so many bootcamps. Portland I'm in Portland. It's a fairly small city. And I think right now we have 5 boot camps.
Wow.
And one of them is turning out 2 classes of 60 people each every 10 weeks.
Wow.
So it's getting a bit saturated, but the market is still there. So
yeah, and so I have friends in San Francisco that are recruiters, and when I was switching over, they were like, whoa, don't do a boot camp. Don't do it. We can't hire people out of boot camps. They're not, there's 1 out of 20 that are hireable, And so I was like, okay. And I had some talks with them, and they were like, just you have to, if you're going to do a boot camp, you also have to have another strategy of how you're still going to become an engineer. You do the boot camp, but where are you who's going to take you on as a junior developer? You need to have all those things sort of lined up.
Right.
Or else you're just going to do the boot camp and then go do something else,
Yeah. And I think that there are some things coming into the market that are trying to fill that. There's a couple places like Thoughtbot has apprenticeship programs. A couple of the other bigger dev shops have that, where you can kind of transition from beginner into intermediate. Excuse me. And then there's some online stuff like Thinkful, or Upcase, where you can kind of build those skills after boot camp. And of course, I'm always a fan. I think the biggest thing in our industry and most industries is mentorship, like finding a mentor, finding those people, and going out
which you'd
and
likely find at
hands.
like Women Who Code or meetups or
Totally.
the social aspect of it.
Meet space, as we like to call it, nerd speak.
Which I always, whenever I hear meet space, I picture MEAT. Like,
No, that's what it means.
Oh, not MEET.
No, it's MEAT.
Oh.
Meet space.
Why?
Because we're nerds and it's not digital, so it's fleshy, so it's meat.
Oh my gosh. Okay. Yeah. Interesting. Okay.
Sorry.
Wow. That's a great, I'm glad. Okay. Continue with the interview.
Yeah. So, so you talked a little bit, you've moved over to the Android team. What's fun and what's hard about Android? I haven't really dug in on Android development. I've done some iOS, but
yeah. So what's really fun about Android is, day one, you can like open up your Android Studio and like download the SDK and like create a page. It has like a button, and you can click the button and it can like play a song. You can do that in like 2 days. So like and you can put, you could publish it to the App Store. You could put it on your phone, like there's definitely this, you can hit an API and pull data back. You could do that in a couple days, learn all that from scratch. So there's like a very easy sort of like, there's a link on Learning to Code in the notes where it's like a graph of like at first you like peak, you're like on it's like a honeymoon at first, and everything seems really easy. But as you sort of start to unfold things, like Android's really complicated, and there's 9,000 versions of Android that people are running out there, and different size devices and tablets, and people are going to be using your app only on Wi-Fi, and there's so many things to think about. So like, as you want to do more, you're just like, you get like royally confused, like very quickly. So it's cool to just sort of get up and running and get started, but it's definitely, there's like a lot to learn. There's things you have to think about, like battery usage and memory and all these things that you don't really deal with if you're a web developer. So it's definitely a lot to get started. I work on a team where there's like a lot of senior engineers. So, and a lot of people that really know what's going on. So that it's like, it's fun, but it's also like, you take some hits to your ego a little bit. Cause I feel like I used to know everything about the data warehouse, and stepping into something where you don't know what's going on and you really have to feel your way through it is like, it can be, a shot to your ego and how you feel about yourself. I always say like, sometimes I feel like Tom Hanks, like when I get code reviews, like in A League of Their Own, where he's like, there's no crying in baseball. Like I literally have to tell myself like, there's no crying in coding when I get like a lot of comments on a code review, or I just totally, like just, it's a lot of like falling down.
I'm so glad I'm not the only person that says there's no crying in coding.
Yes, I say that to myself all the time.
Me too.
And it makes me feel better because like, at least I'm out there, I'm out there and I'm like, they're always like, oh no, you're doing really, really good. It's like, you just have this where you like, you just want, I don't want to be perfect, but like, I want to like be contributing and like, I want to be like getting things done and moving forward and writing really good code. And you're not going to do that when you move into engineering for like a year or two, So you just setting those expectations, you just have to like lower your expectations for yourself a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this is a talk that I have with I meet a lot of junior developers through Women Who Code and stuff. And like explaining to them, I'm like, listen, I've been doing coding for, a lot of years as a professional now. And there's rarely a week that goes by where I don't go, wow, I feel like I know nothing.
Yeah.
I'm like totally Jon Snow. It's not fun.
Yeah. But then when I share that feeling with other developers, they're like, welcome to being an engineer.
Yep, exactly.
Like that's what everyone says to me. They're like, oh, you were frustrated all day, and the last 10 minutes of your day, everything made sense and you got it to run. Like, that's your life. And I kind of love that. Like, personally, like, I actually really love that. Like, I love, like, working all day on a problem. To me, like, the day goes by in 30 minutes to me, even if I, like, want to cry sometimes. Like, it's fun. And I feel like I'm using more of my brain than I ever did before.
Yeah. It's like 30 minutes of success after an entire day of the crying game.
Yeah.
Yep. It's where you're at. And I think that knowing that going in, it's like that. I like to say that, programmers need to be like eternally optimistic because it will work this time. I swear.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Women's Tech Radio. Remember, you can find a full transcription of this show over in the show notes at jupiterbroadcasting.com. You can also subscribe to RSS feeds.
And while you're there, you could also reach out to us on the contact form. Let us know what you think about the show or any guests you might like to hear. Don't forget, we're also on iTunes. And if you have a moment, leave a review so we know how we're doing and how we can improve the show. If you'd like to reach out to Angela and I directly, you can use WTR@jupiterbroadcasting.com for an email or check us out at Twitter @HeyWTR. Thanks for listening.